New security concerns are being raised about Washington's ability to track foreigners who come to the U.S. but refuse to leave. A report this week by the Department of Homeland Security shows that 45 million people entered the U.S. on non-immigrant tourist or business visas. More than 500,000 stayed beyond their lawful admission period. And members of Congress want to know why more isn't being done to find them.
The technology is not the problem. And it strikes me that what's the missing element here is the will on behalf of the federal government writ large to deal with this in a way that helps to restore public confidence. One of the reasons we haven't been able to take even baby steps on immigration reform is because the American people simply don't believe we're serious about enforcing the law.
The U.S. Supreme Court this week joined the election year battle over immigration reform. A ruling is expected by summer on the constitutionality of President Obama's executive order to block the deportation of certain undocumented immigrants. Josh Blackman is an associate law professor at the South Texas College of Law and has testified about this issue before Congress, and he joins us from Houston. Josh, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So obviously we just talked about SCOTUS will hear arguments in April on the administration's immigration executive orders referring to DAPA and DACA. I want to ask you to break that down for our viewers. And is this ruling more about immigration, or is it also about the power of the executive branch?
This case is a classic clash between the powers of the executive and the powers of Congress. In 2014, shortly after the midterm elections, President Obama announced DAPA, Deferred Action for Parents of Americans, and this policy would have shielded from deportation roughly 4.5 million aliens who are here illegally and would have provided them with work authorization. Shortly thereafter, Texas filed a lawsuit joined by 26 states challenging the legality and constitutionality of DAPA, and now the U.S. Supreme Court has agreed to hear this case this coming April.
So do you have any predictions for this summer? I mean, what if they rule in favor of the administration, and what if they rule in favor of Texas and the 25 other states, 26 in total?
Well, no matter what the Supreme Court does, the outcome of this program will depend on who the next president is. If the court rules in favor of President Obama, he has less than 3 months to implement this entire massive program before the next election. If President Clinton or President Sanders is in charge, they'll probably continue it. If a president that's Republicans in charge, they'll probably end it. So regardless of what regardless of what the court does here, it'll be really up to the next president who wants to continue this executive policy.
I want you to elaborate on the political implications. What are they? This is a massive decision. Like you said, it can affect upwards of 5 million people. So what are the political implications?
Well, frankly, if the president is able to start this program and grant what's called deferred status or deferred action to 4.5 million aliens, it's going to be a serious political issue for the next president to remove that status. Already, President Obama has given deferred action to roughly 1 million of the so-called dreamers. President Clinton has said she would continue it. A number of the Republican candidates said they will not. So it's going to be a huge decision of whether voters hold this one way or the other in the upcoming election.
Okay, Josh, we only have time for one more question, so I want you to explain this to me. I hear that you're playing fantasy SCOTUS. I usually only hear about fantasy football, so I want you to explain it to me.
So fantasy SCOTUS is a way that people make predictions about the Supreme Court. We've been in business for almost 6 years. It's totally free to play, and at Fantasy SCOTUS, you can make predictions of all the cases. We also have an educational version for high school students who can actually write briefs and make arguments over YouTube, and we use it as a way to teach high school students about the Supreme Court at the Harlan Institute Fantasy SCOTUS.
All right, well, I'm not saying I would win, that's for sure, but I certainly would do a lot better in Fantasy SCOTUS than I would in fantasy football. Josh Blackman, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.